From Bishop Ireton High School, it's Real World Wednesdays, a show featuring alumni and friends of the school for the Cardinal community and beyond. I'm Ryan Fannin, Associate Director of Advancement and a member of the BI Class of 1989. And on the show today is Bobby Hogue, Bishop Ireton Class of 1977, a former Bishop Ireton student athlete who went on after his high school days on Cambridge Road to have an amazing life and career. Many of us face difficulty and challenges in our lives. Some face more than others. Some overcome those challenges, and some don't. Our guest today, Bobby Hogue, BI Class of 1977, faced a particular number of challenges as he grew up and into his adult life. He was one of 7 children in his family and the youngest of 4 boys. After an injury from an altercation before he started high school, which might have derailed the athletic ambitions of someone less strong, Bobby turned to swimming. It was there that he found incredible success, first as a state champion swimmer and captain for the Bishop Ireton Cardinals, and then later as a swimmer and water polo player for George Washington University. Due to his hard work and accomplishments, he has since been inducted into both the Bishop Ireton Athletic Hall of Fame and the George Washington University Athletic Hall of Fame. After his father left his family home while Bobby was in high school, which could have negatively impacted the advancement of his life, Bobby instead took on the part-time role of caregiver to his younger sisters while simultaneously managing a Division I athletic scholarship at George Washington and the rigorous demands of a top-notch collegiate education. After he graduated from GW in 1981, Bobby earned his JD from George Mason University and was admitted to the Virginia Bar in 1984. For the next decade and a half, he served in a number of roles in the legal profession, including important civil rights work before beginning a role as deputy counsel for the U.S. Marine Corps Commandant in 2000, working in the Pentagon. On September 11, 2001, Bobby was in the Pentagon when it was attacked. The plane crashed into the building just below where he and his colleagues were standing. Despite enormous challenges and overwhelming odds, Bobby made it out of the building alive while helping others out along the way. For many, surviving such a traumatic event might have foiled future professional and personal success. But Bobby didn't let it define him. He continued making substantial impacts in his career for the next 24 years and is set for retirement from federal service next month in December of 2025. But to understand what makes Bobby tick and why he's been so successful in his life and career, you have to go back to his childhood, when the difficult circumstances he personally faced and the United States also faced at that time began to shape how he thought and who he would become.
You have to remember, I was born in '59, raised during the 60s, so I was fully aware, I would say, when 1968 rolls around and, the bad things start to happen. Bobby Kennedy gets shot, Martin Luther King. I have a living memory of Martin Luther King. And those events are a part of my life. They're foundational in a lot of ways. This country was in a bad spot in the late 60s. And as I was becoming an adolescent and seeing all these things and watching the Vietnam War on TV, thinking, it's guys like me who go, blue-collar families. My father was a laborer. My mother was a secretary, 7 kids. I'm 5th of 7 kids. And so it's a family like mine that was supporting the war effort by providing boys to go. I'm the 4th of 4 boys, all born in a row. By the way, we're only about a year apart, so when I came to Ireton, I had a brother in every grade in front of me. Interesting experience, but the world here was very different as well. Again, it's hard to describe how much this country has changed and how much we have changed as a people, but I'll give you a couple of grounding points. I grew up in South Arlington, which is a very blue-collar spot. In those days, now it's like Yuppieville. You got people driving Volvos. In those days, There were ladder trucks out front, electricians and plumbers. My dad was a laborer, he's a cement finisher mostly. So, he had an old pickup truck with an overturned wheelbarrow in the back, that kind of thing. The neighborhood was segregated. Arlington schools, I was in Arlington, South Arlington, had not yet been desegregated. And when Arlington desegregated its schools, I was probably, I can't remember exactly which year, fourth, fifth, somewhere in that. My mother had decided, one of you guys is going to the district school, because at that time, all of us were in Catholic schools. My parents were real hardcore believers in Catholic education, which at the time was very highly regarded as quality education. And they had little or no money. With 7 kids, he's a laborer, she's a secretary. There's no money in that house. But they believed in it so much, they committed all those resources to getting Catholic educations for us. Anyway, I got pulled out of the Catholic school, which was Blessed Sacrament over there on Braddock Road, and sent to Drew Elementary in Green Valley, which was my district school, all black. I was one of, I think, 3 white kids at the school. That was different and interesting, and provided me with a very useful perspective. Not immediately, because my immediate reaction was, why are you doing this to me? I mean, all my friends going to Blessed Sacrament. In years that followed, I started to recognize, because I, for a while, had been a minority in a school, I started to see things just a little bit differently. And it gave me a perspective that I could use later in my professional life, because one of the first things I did in practicing law was take up civil rights issues. And I started to see that I understood them differently, probably because of that, and I have to say, minuscule experience. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, I wasn't going to stop being a white kid. I was always going to be a white kid. I was a white kid at a black school. It's just that being in the minority, in that much of a minority, it made a difference in how my days went. And so I could relate, at some level, into what minorities were feeling in the country generally. And that helped me quite a bit in the civil rights practice.
Your decision to come to Ireton, you talked about having siblings. Tell us about the whole sort of journey to get to Cambridge Road for you and how that came about and the family connections.
My mother was a big believer in Ireton and sort of the local pyramid of Catholic schools. And so she was dedicated to this. I was going to go to Ireton no matter what, unless I really screwed up somehow. And I was a good student, so that wasn't going to happen. And Ireton was just in the path.
You and I were talking a little bit before the podcast today about some injuries that you had. You had to overcome some adversity. But when you honed in, you ended up having an outstanding athletic career at Bishop Ireton as a swimmer, so much that you were eventually inducted into the BI Athletic Hall of Fame in 2012. And I want to talk about that in just a moment. But before we get into your extracurricular activities while at Ireton, you attended the school at a very unique time in its history. At that time, the school was experimenting with education by appointment, so traditional classes were not a regular part of the school day. Can you talk about that unique nature of that time and how you approached learning? And did any faculty members stand out to you as particularly impactful that you remember the most?
There's a lot to unpack there. First thing that I noticed being different when I got here was it was a 6-day school week, not a 5-day school week. So it was A through, I think, F days. I should be able to do the math, but since it's in public, I probably shouldn't try to count it out. But in any event, so that you had an A day schedule, B day schedule, et cetera, et cetera. So if you started on an A day on Monday the 1st, the following week, Monday the 7th or 8th, you're now on F day, and your week starts out that way. So that took some getting used to. It took some planning, but that was unique and a lot more like college, I think, in the retrospect than probably anybody suspected. And that went on for a couple years, and traditional learning here until I can't remember if it was junior or senior year, we jumped into that more experimental approach to things. What jumps out to me about that is it really relied on each student to bring what they needed every day. I don't mean pencil and paper, I mean internally focus, drive, finish, you know what I mean? You had to have that every day, or you weren't going to get done because you had a whole year's worth of schoolwork to do, and you weren't going to traditional classes. You were each teacher would hand you, I think they were called learning guides. That's what it was. You'd get the learning guide for algebra, whatever, and you'd have to study the learning guide. And when you were satisfied, you went to the testing center and you took the test. That was it. So you didn't get to sit down with Mr. Renner and ask him a million questions. Although it turns out, yeah, you really could do that. But guys like me assumed, no, you didn't do that. You just studied the thing, you went and took the test, and that's how it worked. Until I got smart and realized the teachers are actually here to help you. If you have questions, you go see the teachers, you ask them the questions and all those things. It was an interesting experience. I will say closer to a law school-like experience than anything else, except that even in law school, you have to go for lectures. You have to take your own notes. You get to ask questions, but most people are too afraid to look stupid in law school classes, so they don't ask really difficult, dumb questions. And the ones that everybody really wants to ask, they don't ask. But the workload in law school is really a lot, and that struck me at the time as, although I couldn't say what law school would be like in retrospect and upon reflection, it was a lot more like law school. A lot of paperwork, a lot of study time, a lot of time in the library, and then going to take the test. And that's it, live or die, Now, you asked about faculty members who stood out. There were several who stood out to me. Father Godley ran the testing center. So there was no trash in the testing center. It's like you came in with pencil, paper, and nothing else, and leave your attitude at the door, because Father Godley did not tolerate any stuff. No whispering, no goofing around. We're all teenage boys, don't forget. We acted like teenage boys, so he was perfect for that job.
Did everybody know he was a Golden Glove boxer?
Yeah, we all knew. And he also had this thing, Father Godley, that he would occasionally, if kids had real beef with each other and it looked like it was going to go to blows or had come to blows, he would drag those kids to the gym, give them boxing gloves, let them go. So, yeah, you got to be careful what you wish for. Father Godley was prepared to provide all of it for you. Other teachers that stood out for me, the faculty members who I thought really stood out were the homeroom teachers. My homeroom teachers that really stood out, Father McGee and Father O'Neill. And by the way, you can't go through this without thinking about the Oblates, and maybe we could talk about that later on, because the Oblates had such a huge impact on the school. And they were examples for us to follow, and intentionally so. And so I think, I don't know what it's like here now, but I have to believe that if there were Oblates here, there would be an element here that would resonate with me just a little bit more, and maybe with your students a little more, because they don't get that Christian life example every day. But they were very good, and they sat on your head and made sure you stayed on task and all the things that they needed to do. And O'Neill, McGee, Father Norman, Father Grant, who was unfortunately the Dean of Men, who I got to know very well, and he was a good man. In retrospect, I was really, really glad. Funny thing about Father Grant, again, everybody will have their own memories of Father Grant, but he could be hard on you. He was the Dean of Men. His job was to be the disciplinarian. But he also had a human side that's very hard to describe and very easy to access. And I had a lifelong friend, Mike Morrison, lived around the corner from me, went to Blessed Sacrament together, and Bishop Ireton. He's out there now, by the way. He's a working jazz drummer. Anyway, he went by Mo. Me and Mo went to Mass with Father Grant. I think it was on F days. And every F day, we would go. And we were the only two people there. The two of us and Father Grant. And so the Mass took on a very different experience and kind of meaning for me, because he would read the gospel and then we just have a conversation like you and I are having right now. And we get to ask the really stupid question, because the internet didn't exist. Nobody was recording anything to try to make you look stupid later on. You got to ask and postulate, and he tolerated a lot of silliness from us because he knew we were boys who were growing, and he encouraged that, and it made it a safe space inside the Mass. Very unique experience in my judgment.
Wow, that's fascinating. Let's talk athletics next. I alluded to it earlier, but you were a tremendous swimmer at Bishop Ireton, would ultimately continue your career in college. You won numerous state titles throughout your time at Ireton, including the 100 breaststroke in 1976 and the 100 breaststroke and the 100 butterfly in 1977. And you were also named the Alexandria Sportsman's Club Swimmer of the Year for your senior season. Did you know from a young age that you were trending toward being a competitive swimmer?
No. I was a summer swimmer, was what everybody would say. I only swam, even though the AAU, the Amateur Athletic Union, was around, and there were some very big swimming clubs in those days, Solitar, Starlit, a couple others that jump out at me. But in any event, I didn't swim for any of those big teams. So some of the stars, Bishop Ireton's traditional stars, the Tim Carringtons, Rob Rouse, they were AAU swimmers. I was not. So I was a summer guy. And what happened with me, and we were discussing briefly before, I had an injury. I think when I was in 8th grade, so I had to be 12 years oldish, going into 13 about that time. Again, youngest guy in the class, right? I lost an after-school fight, and my left arm was broken badly in 3 places, and had screws put in and 2 surgeries. And at the time, my father was this big John Wayne kind of guy. He wanted tough boys, and you had to play football, and you had to play baseball, and you had to play basketball. And the expectations were you were going to do well. And my older brothers were all very good athletes, especially my next oldest brother, Charlie, who, even though I was a scholarship athlete at a university and now a member of the Hall of Fame, he's considered the athlete of the family. So that tells you something about how that family worked. But in any event, football was not going to be a long-term possibility for me because of that injury. And so I focused on swimming as rehab with my doctor's encouragement. And I went through a couple of what I would call wilderness seasons where I was nobody, swimming in the outside lane, not bringing home, ribbons or anything like that. And then one year, 14 or 15, suddenly I was winning. And I think I went through my freshman year at Ireton as a nobody and experienced what it was like to be at high school level and the team aspect of it, which was also unexpected for me. And again, Father Smith, Harry Sober, enormously positive influences and examples for a kid like me who really needed that. And so that welcoming environment, that encouragement, and also through Harry, setting a level of expectation that you had to come and be there to work. And his famous phrase, everybody who swam for him knows, 6:59, door closed at 6:59. If you weren't on the deck, you weren't practicing that day. And so, simple things like that a teenage boy has to kind of take on, strap on, and just deal with. And he placed those expectations on us. And it helped me enormously because it was a positive kind of expectation. Like, this is the minimum. You'll be here on time. Then you're going to get to the pool part of it. You're going to work your butt off. And I'm going to make sure you do. And then I'm going to put you in meets where I think you can compete. And I will encourage you and keep working with you until you get better and better and better. That was my experience of high school swimming. And it really paid off. I mean, in my sophomore year, again, I was a scrawny kid. My sophomore year, I was probably 5'8", 5'9", 120 pounds, 125 pounds, nothing. But we went to UVA for the state swimming championships, and I finished in the top 10 in the 50 free at 15 as a sophomore. Like, everybody's, where did that come from? Did he do, run up from behind the deck and die? That kind of thing. Shocked everyone, including me. And then every year after that, some new crazy development occurred, including I went home sophomore year at 5'9" and came back at 6 feet. Those kinds of things happened to me, and each one of those things elevated my performance.
It's amazing when you talk to different people about experiences and how they felt as a freshman. And now you explained a little bit about the things you went through, the growing pains as a freshman, but you were around great people.
Yes.
And you eventually would become a captain. And describe how that came full circle and the thrill of sort of seeing all that come together as your time on Cambridge Road was winding down.
I look back at that and I see that as a period piece from 73 to 77. I don't look at any individual year anymore because it's part of a much longer stream of experiences that I was having. For me, the things that stood out were the things that the competitions and the encouragement and the training I was getting from Harry and Father Al. And each of them something different. Father Al was setting the standard of a good Christian life in many respects. He was a mentor. He was a sounding board. He was always there. He was a really decent guy. He was also enormously, fabulously handsome, looked exactly like Robert Redford. Everywhere we went, if he didn't have his collar on, people were saying crazy stuff to him. But watching how he handled himself and setting that example really made a difference to me. Harry, again, I've already said, Harry had been in the service. Harry had been an All-American swimmer at ECU. And he had a way of setting expectation and helping you understand that you could work to those expectations and you would be okay. For me, becoming a captain was a logical conclusion of Harry's work over 4 years and not just my work. I was the clay and he was molding it. And the fact that he put so much faith in me really sort of propelled me forward and put me in those positions. And he held me to a very high standard early on.
In 2012, you were inducted into the Bishop Ireton Athletic Hall of Fame. And what was that night like for you and your family, especially the way you just described everything you went through? And now, all these years later, you're going into the Hall of Fame at your alma mater.
I have a very clear recollection of that night and just being very grateful for having the ability to say thank you to everybody, in particular Harry and Father Al, my colleagues, my friends, my co-captains, some of whom were there, and my mother. So that is a sort of it's a signal moment for somebody, and you can't blow it by, as you and I have discussed also, bringing up a legal pad with detailed notes 6 pages long about all the experiences that you had. They're important, but they're not important to the crowd who's there. What's important in that moment to me is saying thank you, and that you people did a good job helping me. And by the way, that it took all of you. That if any of you hadn't been there, this would be a different outcome.
So after your remarkable time here at Bishop Ireton in the 70s, you headed to George Washington University, where you would continue your stellar athletic career as a member of both the Division I swim team and the Division I water polo team. Can you talk about your time in college? What was your experience like going from Bishop Ireton to George Washington, and the level of preparedness and focus you must have to compete at such a high level in 2 sports while also attending classes at the college level?
GW, for me, great period of time when I look at my life, but also a very long wilderness period. I mean, at that point, my family life had fallen apart. My mother had moved to Colorado. My dad, he was gone. He had been gone for some years at that point. In fact, I had to, at my mother's request, moved home to make sure that my younger sisters graduated high school. So I was, for lack of a better term, kind of the center of the family for at least half the time I was at GW. While I was going through those other experiences, I was out the door every morning at 4, on the bus, going to D.C., train in the morning, go to class all day, train in the afternoon, think back on the bus, go home, okay, and make sure that they're doing their homework and that they're doing all the things that they need to do. So for me, just a very, very hard time, a very big pack to shoulder. That said, GW was a great, great opportunity for me, and I was so fortunate to have caught the eye of the coach there. In 77, there's no internet, and swimming is not a sport that's recruited for, I mean, to get a swimming scholarship in 77, you had to be, Mark Spitz's younger brother. And so I was just very fortunate. And how that even came about, we had been training at the YMCA in Alexandria, and the heater broke. And this is a fairly routine event. We happen at least once or twice every year. It's just something you do. The Y was an old, crappy pool, and, you just dealt with it. Harry somehow got the idea, hey, I'm going to call around some of these local schools. We can't miss days of practice. And he got a hold of the coach at GW, who said, yeah, come on down. You can use our pool this time. So, hey, everybody on the bus tonight, we're going to GW to train. I'm like, okay. Got on the bus, went down to GW, trained. I don't know if it was 1 or 2 nights. At the end of the second night, the coach was there, and he was talking to Harry. And Harry pulled me aside on the way back to the bus and said, hey, he asked me a bunch of questions about you. You might get a call. I said, well, hey, I was hoping Villanova was going to call, but the first guy shows up with the money wins the prize, because it was either that or I was going to join the Marine Corps because I didn't have any other alternatives. And GW did show up and made me a very generous offer, and I was grateful, and I worked my tail off for that coach and for GW. And yeah, I mean, I was the MVP in my first year and captain the second year, and all this leadership responsibility and expectation was placed on me like right out of the chute. And I was just thinking, I just got to keep my life together for, 36 more hours, make sure I get a couple more meals in me before they figure out I don't really know what I'm doing. And it just worked out like that every day, just every day, just keep it together today.
And you eventually would get inducted into the George Washington Athletic Hall of Fame in 1998. As you share with us what it meant at Ireton to go into the Athletic Hall of Fame, what was that feeling like at GW to go into their Athletic Hall of Fame?
Similar in many respects. Opportunity to say thank you, show appreciation for the university and my mother and people who supported me. Different in the sense that, I said before, Harry guided me and kept me at task in high school. Harry doesn't exist in college. Like, you got to get there, and nobody's locking the door. Harry locked the door. No, you will be there. I'm paying for you to be there. I'll give you a simple example. My very first semester at GW, we were training, and we had already started two-a-days, so we were early October, I think. And I had my first midterms coming up, and I think I was a political science major at the time. Didn't really matter. I was majoring in swimming, right? I looked at the schedule and realized, oh my God, I have an out-of-town swimming meet that day. I can't make it, so I got to go see the professor. Talk to the coach. Coach said, go see the professor. Okay, go see the professor. And I told him the whole story, and I said, I'm a scholarship athlete. I got to be on the bus. And he said, son, you got to figure out if you're going to, be here to be a swimmer or be a student. Like, your future depends on this. So basically, have your rear end in the seat on game day, taking the test. I was like, okay, that sounds pretty clear and reasonable. I went back to see the coach, brought me in to see the athletic director. His name was Bob Ferris, and Mr. Ferris listened patiently and calmly, and then looked at me at the end and said, Bob, I'm paying about $10,000 a year to have you here. I expect you to be on that bus. Okay, that's what life is like if you're a scholarship athlete at GW, not a basketball player, in the 70s. Like, it's a school first, but they're paying for you to be here. And so you got to find a way to make it work. Well, I took the zero. Very tough to maintain a grade point average if you're up against that kind of a demand. And so I took the zero and worked to overcome it. And I managed to overcome it over 4 years, but I worked a lot harder to try to figure out how to get those things done, to talk to professors early in the year, to be accountable for, the homework and the papers and all this, just to make sure that I was on top of it, and then I was keeping them in the loop and all those other things. But the clear expectation was, it's on you, buddy. Figure it out. And by the way, as you know, that's what the rest of your life is like. Can't make the mortgage this month? Yeah, really sorry to hear that. Here's how much you owe me next month.
Now, after you graduated from GW in 1981, you attended law school at George Mason University and received your JD in 1984, as well as your admission to the Virginia bar. At what time did you know, Bobby, that law was a career you wanted to pursue?
Well, of course, growing up in a blue-collar environment of South Arlington, I didn't really know any lawyers, and had no idea what lawyers did. But my mother had this way of saying, you should think about law. I mean, I'm talking like in grade school. You should think about law school. You get pretty good grades. You're reasonably smart for a dumb kid, and you like to argue. And that's a profession that encourages that. And, simple things like that a parent throws at you, sometimes that sticks. And that stuck with me. And again, I'm downselling my mother a little bit. She was a constant source of encouragement. And not just, you should go to law school. Here's a law school I read about. Here's an article I read about this law school there. Read this, whatever else you do. But she's constantly putting the idea on the table. Even when I was at points in my life, including my junior year of high school, where the whole family life, like I said, had just fallen apart. And I wasn't sure I was going to be able to finish high school at some point. The idea that I was going to go to college seemed ridiculous. Law school? What are we talking about here? I'm going to be in the Marine Corps. I'm not going to be, going to law school. Oh, my God. But she kept it there, and she kept it as an article of faith that it was possible for me. And that made it possible in my own mind. And then by the time I got through GW, by that time I had met lawyers. I knew people who were going to the law school there. And I knew that it was possible because some of these guys on the surface didn't seem any brighter than me, which is not saying much for them. And I thought, maybe that is something that's achievable. I should try this.
When you graduated in 1984 with the law degree, did you have an idea of what you wanted to do with the law degree specifically, or were you thinking a couple different roads at that point?
Oh, yeah. I was going to go make a lot of money and buy a red Porsche, like every other dumb 25-year-old, And I'm only slightly exaggerating that because that was clearly in my mindset. At some point, I was going to be the first Hogue that made any real money, because lawyers have the prospect of making real money. Then in those days, getting a job was awfully tough, and I was at George Mason, which was not yet a name brand law school. And but you do what you can. And I hustled. I got an internship, and I worked really hard at the internship at the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. Worked for a guy named Joe Morris, who was one of President Reagan's appointees. I wasn't a political, so that didn't seem to reach me. But being around somebody who thought about issues at the national level, who talked to me about issues in a way that a mentor would, that made a big difference for me and sort of kept me going. When I got out of law school, OPM offered me a job, and it was really, at that time, the only job offer I had on the table. And it wasn't like take it or leave it. I wanted to work at OPM because they were giving me good opportunities. And I knew the people in the office already. And they put me on the staff in the staffing and civil rights section, and I immediately picked up civil rights work. And in retrospect, it was probably the best thing for me, again, given my experience at Drew Elementary, some of the things I had grown up witnessing on TV, 68, all the things that happened, listening to my mother, the way she talked about these national issues and the concerns of ordinary people, working people. That was a good fit for me. So I worked in civil rights law for a while until I broke away, and then finally went out and tried my skills in the private sector. So yeah, it was a good start for me, even though I envisioned something else happening. I wound up coming back into government after being in the private sector for a while because I got a call from a friend who was this is how things work then. No internet, there's no job site. You get a call from a friend, and she said, "Hey, yeah, you worked with me at OPM. You were a good trial lawyer. I need a trial lawyer. I'm down here at the Department of Navy. We have this crazy new command has been set up. We'd run all the space business for the Navy. The Navy's the largest consumer of space assets because ships are at sea, right? That's the only communication. So they have some very interesting stuff, including 17 laboratories, major laboratories, like billions of dollars in research being done in these laboratories. She said, I need a trial lawyer. We're all around the world. You fit the bill. What do you say? I was like, yeah, sure. Sounds great. Sounds crazy. Sounds interesting. Again, for me, I had this belief at the time and still hold to that belief that broadening your experience was as important as getting experience. And so that you could see things on multiple levels and understand issues in ways that you couldn't otherwise understand them if you didn't have that exposure. Went to the Navy. Navy worked out pretty well for me, got to say, because I'm retiring from the department in about 45 days.
Since your career is so dense and since you've enjoyed success due to the hard work you've put in, perhaps it would be easier to maybe ask this more broadly. For those young individuals who might be listening to this episode, what advice would you give them as they begin to look at what career they might want to pursue, irrespective of what that career might be?
Over the years, I've spent a lot of time talking to high school students periodically. In fact, I developed a relationship with a high school in a little farming community in Ohio. And they would bring their seniors in every year, and I would meet with them for about 2 hours, and we'd have these kinds of conversations. Very raw, open, non-attribution kind of conversation. Teachers present, of course. And what I would say to them is what I would say to anybody else now, and I was glad to have the opportunity to have said it to them, and that was you have to expose yourself to as many reasonably available things as you can. Don't try to expose yourself, for example, to a 9/11 experience. That had a big impact on me, but it's not something you should seek out, is what I'm saying. But as an attorney, should you lock yourself down and learn government contracts and make a lot of money? If that's what you want, sure. But why would you limit skill and the ability that you've crafted over a number of years to just one thing? You've got almost 20 years of school when you get out of law school. That can be really productive if it's a broad experience that's giving you exposure to a number of different kinds of ideas. High school kids, college kids really need to find those experiences and those conversations and ideas and people who will pry open their minds and let them see other possibilities. It sounds like a simple, trite thing to say, but hope only exists if you can envision more than what's in front of you. The ability to envision those things often comes from the experiences that you've had. Broader experience will serve you well. That's what I would say to people. And if, since this is likely to be heard by high school kids, I would say, when I was your age, whatever age you are, yes, I can remember 50 years ago. Thank you very much. Things didn't exist that are available to you. One of the things that's available to you through the internet is this site called the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Okay, so I'm not going to recommend to you any particular course of study or profession, but I will encourage you strongly to go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and just fish around on the site. What you're going to find there, among other things that I found useful and that I talked to this class out of Ohio with, is Look, there's lists of professions and how much money they make in different parts of the country and what the educational requirements are. And so you can immediately assess whether your plan of becoming the best drywall hanger in Northern Virginia is a good plan for a guy who also wants to raise a family. You can immediately tell this is how much drywall hangers make. Here's how much plumbers make. Here's how much doctors make and lawyers make. Here's what the educational requirement is. Don't pass that information up, just knowing that it's there. Okay? Go seek it out, figure it out, and try it on in your mind. Is this something I might be interested in? Because that will explode the number of possibilities that are available to you in your life just by thinking about it before you get out of high school.
I want to ask you about something I know you've spoken about before, but I think it's an important part of your story. You were in the Pentagon on September 11th, 2001. The plane that hit the building crashed just below where your office was. I know this is an emotional topic for you, and out of respect, you and I even talked before this interview, and I asked you if you'd be comfortable to share a little bit about that day, and you said, you'd be willing to, and if you could share maybe what you remember about that day and the immediate aftermath as a first question, I'd like to start with, if that's okay, Bobby.
I do appreciate your asking in advance. Yes, it is an emotional topic, a hard topic for a lot of reasons, but for me, as much as anything, it's just below the surface. I was, on that day, I was completing my 1-year probationary period as a senior executive in the Department of the Navy. I had taken the job of Deputy Counsel for the Commandant and started on September 11th, 2000. So I spent a whole year working very closely with the senior leadership of the Marine Corps, and this is the service level. The Commandant of the Marine Corps is a military advisor to the President of the United States. This is a very high jump kind of a job. Marine Corps has a very distinct culture. And I will oftentimes refer to it as a masculine culture. I don't mean that to exclude women. It's just that it's very much like being in a football locker room all the time, and if you can deal with that, fine. If you have other words for it, that's also fine. But that's how I tend to view it. So I was adjusting to the culture, learning how to become a senior executive. I had a wonderful boss. His name was Peter Murphy, who really was a mentor to me on a professional way that others, no one had tried to be before. And in very much the same way that Harry was, explain how things work, explain what the level of expectation was, but didn't for our profession. And that helped me enormously because, again, I had no relationships with any senior executives. I didn't know what a partner in a law firm acted like, and these were partnership level jobs. And so having that experience with him in that environment was great. And being around the Marines, again, very distinct culture, also a wonderful experience in a lot of ways, a very tough experience in a lot of ways for reasons that you can probably imagine. September 11th comes around. On that day, it's Tuesday, glorious day. It's that day in early fall where all the humidity's gone. The sky is a deep crystal blue. You don't have any, because there's no humidity, you don't have any haze, no pollution evident in the sky. It's one of those days when the first rays of the sun come up over the horizon, they pierce the blue sky, they don't illuminate it. You know what I mean? It's just a glorious kind of thing. I remember it. So I had a 6 o'clock or 6:30 breakfast meeting with a general officer that day in the Navy Annex, which is just up the hill from the Pentagon. And that was a regular Tuesday event. So had my meeting, came out, came down the hill to the Pentagon, hung around the parking lot for a few more minutes than I needed to, just to enjoy the beautiful weather for a second. And then when I walked in the office, I noticed, and you have to understand the office at that point is on the west wall of the Pentagon, what's now famous for being the impact area. Anyway, my boss was talking with a Marine major who worked for us about a case, and they were both standing there away from the table. There was a table in the office to facilitate these kinds of conversations, but neither one of them was at the table. They were both standing in the middle of the office staring at a TV in the corner, and there was video out of New York. So I walked in, and I was doing a little idiotic sing-song, I made my probation, you can't fire, stupid, but just trying to make light of the situation because now I had cleared the first major hurdle, and I was, whatever followed. And they were ignoring me. And I finally looked and I saw the video. And it was, you've probably seen in the replays, a shot from a very high building in New York, I don't know which building, looking out towards the Trade Center. And one of the buildings was smoking. And it was a distant shot, so you could see all of the New York skyline. And the voiceover was really kind of, this is where it is. It's down there. Seems like a fire of some sort. Apparently it was a plane crash. Don't have too many, so there's a lot of speculation, very confused conversation, low tones, that sort of thing. And I said, what the hell? How did that happen? How did a guy with all that sky to work with, how did he wreck into a building? I mean, that had to be some really catastrophic mechanical problem or something like that. Anyway, they go back to talking about their case. I'm keeping an eye on New York. Seems kind of odd. Went back to my office, which was just on the other side of the wall from Peter's office. And I'm coming in and out because I'm the deputy, so the deputy's responsible, kind of like the chief operating officer. What's happening today? Where's the schedule? Do we have all our people? What filings have to be made? I'm the guy who makes the train run on time. Okay. So I'm in and out of his office. And I happened to be in there around 9 o'clock. I don't know exactly. But it was around 9 o'clock. And now the three of us are standing there watching the TV and just sort of talking about the case, but really one eye's on New York. And all of a sudden, on the right side of the shot comes another airplane. And you hadn't seen much in the air through that period, that whole time period of that video shot, except maybe a helicopter here and there. Here comes another airplane from the right side of the screen. Then it kind of banks towards the Twin Towers, and you see it's like, whoa, what's happening? Disappeared behind the plane, and then bam, fireball jumps out of the second one. That, from just how my brain worked, I looked at it and said, wow, what a shot. I mean, how did he, just the dumb luck that he would be on top of the building, taking that video when the plane crash occurred. And then, oh wait, that's the second tower. And then just a whole rush, a collapse, if you will, of emotion and a little bit of panic. And what are we going to do now? My blood pressure shot up. And behind all of that is the thought, well, we are a country at war. We just don't know with whom. And really, like that, like somebody had punched me in the face. And I immediately, because again, I'm the deputy, I'm the COO, I run to the door. We're with the Marines, like we're a country at war. We're going to be on deck here within, 15 minutes. And call the admin chief, young corporal, hey, I want to know the status of our people, all our people, worldwide, now. He picks up the phone, starts punching numbers. He comes back, blah, blah, blah. Here's who's up. Here's who's got people on deck. These are the people on the other side of the world. They're still asleep, don't know what's happening. And here's the threat condition inside the Pentagon. Threat condition normal. I said, that can't be right. Check that every 5 minutes. Come back to me directly and tell me what the threat condition is. So this goes on for about 30 minutes. And about every 5 minutes or so, he comes back and says, threat con normal, threat con normal, threat con normal. Now, in my office, I have my desk facing the outside window, so I'm kind of looking out towards Arlington Cemetery and the Navy Annex. And he came in around 9:30 and said, yeah, threat con's still normal. I jumped up from the desk. I said, it's going to be threat con normal. We're in the flight pattern for National Airport, for God's sake, blah, blah, blah. I got from my desk, walked around through the suite. At this point, I was going to go see Peter Murphy and say, Peter, we got to do something. I don't know what we got to do, but we got to do something, And right when I got to the office ran, again, parallel to the outside wall. It's just a long, flat office with offices facing the windows, and then a hallway, and then other offices on the interior side of the Pentagon. I got to the main door, which is about the center point of the office, and it all just went. So the plane flew in just under my windows. It took out all of the support structure, massive explosion. And we get tossed, and I mean tossed, like thrown through the ceilings, taking out the lights and the piping and everything. I wake up on the other side of the office outside Peter's door, and I'm just kind of picking myself up. And this is very hard to describe, and I don't want to waste a whole lot of time talking about it, but if you've ever been in a bar fight and you've been hit in the face and you're picking yourself up off the floor, it's a little bit like that. Like, you don't know exactly how you wound up down there because a minute ago you were doing this and now you're doing this. And so there's a lost time experience. And none of my faculties were really working at 100%. You know, the color hadn't come back on into my eyeballs yet. And as I picked myself up off the floor, I was looking towards the west wall through Peter's doorway where he had a window, and I could see a rolling orange and black cloud. And a second or two, I can see that's a fireball. Like, uh-oh, you know, and then, you know, again, consciousness is coming back slowly. I'm picking myself up. Peter's being picked up off the floor by the major at this point. And anyway, I turned to the admin chief and I said, get us out of here. Because this thing is, we've been hit. It's all going to go down. The office at that point had broken in half. The part of the office where my office was, the part that I had just walked over from, and again, it's just a long, narrow interior hallway inside the office suite, right? But it had been broken in half, a line bisecting the office from the outside wall to the interior of the Pentagon, where there was an expansion joint running. The Pentagon is a series of stone buildings connected by steel cables. You hit one, if it snaps the cables, that one can collapse and leave the rest. Well, that's effectively what was going to happen, except that the airplane had taken out the support columns under the next side too. And so the side we were standing on was in the process of beginning to collapse, groaning and chunks of stuff falling out of the ceiling. Anyway, bad news, the crack in the floor runs under our door. So the corporal gets over there, hefty kid, weightlifter, athlete, played basketball at TC Williams, a great kid. Couldn't move it. And then start to realize some of this that I thought was just kind of foggy. It's really not fog. It's actually a mist that's in the air that I can now smell and taste. It's jet fuel. When the airplane exploded and pushed all of its jet fuel out, that all, of course, found as many open spaces as it could. We were above it. The fire that happened, the fireball that occurred, consumed all the oxygen that was available for that split second. The jet fuel that had made its way into our compartment didn't ignite. It was just hanging in the air like a mist. And just, we were covered in it. So now I go over to help him pry open this door. We're straddling the crack. Right below us is the massive fire. And the floor is separating as we're doing this. And yeah. Anyway, it took about 5 minutes, thank God for that young man and his strength. Between the two of us, we were able to pry open the door. We get out into the hallway. Door opens onto what I will call the south side, the part that had broken away from the rest of the building and was in the process of collapsing. I mean, really it all was, but the north side, you know, it just wasn't going quite as fast. And then you have that moment of, okay, what do we do? Like, there's only two places to go from there. You can go south down the hall, because the Pentagon only has a limited number of hallways, and the hallways along the outside walls are about 100 yards long. And at each end and in the middle, there's a singular hallway that leads into the interior. Well, we were between those hallways. So we had to make it to one of those interior hallways to get out, which meant we either had to run south, the part that was collapsing, the floors breaking away, and the pressure of the upper floors is sitting on the building, on the doorways and door frames. These solid core doors are exploding and burying shards into the wall across from us, or not across, but from the door openings. You just have to envision it's like like an Indiana Jones scene, like if you run down here and out fly the darts and kill you, Okay, well, nobody wanted to go that way. You didn't have a whole lot of choices. Then there's the north way, which led to a construction entrance because the Pentagon was being remodeled. And the construction entrance was pried open a little way, and smoke, black smoke, was billowing through that. Now, as all this is occurring, black smoke is accumulating at the ceiling, super hot, and it has no place to go yet. So it's gathering and it's descending in a very distinct line. And it's just coming like this, and then pretty soon you have to bend over, and then you're hunched over, and then we got our ties wrapped around our faces, and we're trying to figure out do we have the courage to do this? Are we going to The only thing left for us is run to the north entrance, which is apparently into the fire, in order to live. And just as we're making that decision, and at this point, by the way, the boss is out. He's more or less being carried by this young major named Joe Baker, who's a hero in my book. We see entering the hallway from the construction entrance, tan pants, because can't see the guy because the smoke is so thick, and it's all trying to press up to the ceiling. But it's a Navy chief, and chiefs in those days wore the tan pants, right? Or it was an officer, but he had tan pants, black shoes, and he's hollering, at the top of his lungs, if you can hear my voice, come this way, there's a way out. Immediate relief, like the world slides off your shoulders for a second, and you think, oh my God, we might actually live through this. And it's not like, people ask, did you think you were going to die? It's not like that. Then I think I was going to die. I was sure we were going to die. I couldn't see how we were going to live. That's the problem. And that was the first indication that we might actually live. So, and again, at this point, me and the corporal are leading this charge. It's a merry band of 4 people. The boss is punch drunk and doing his best. We hop over the crack. Now we're on the north side, and it's also groaning and grumbling, but it's not collapsing at the same rate as the southern piece. And we start to head down the hall, and we come to a doorway. And again, I'm nominally in charge. Stop. This is a door. This is an interior office. Like, do we run, which every part of me wants to do? Or do we stop and we go in this office and look for people? And I don't know what people think is going to happen in their heads in that moment. For me, it was pretty simplistic. I just didn't think I could live with myself if we did that. And so I make the decision. I grabbed the admin chief. I said, Tim, you're going in. I'm going to stay right here in the doorway. And I'm going to count to 10. And if you're not back by 10, I'm coming in for you. So he goes in, and I count out loud. 1, 2, 3, Comes to 10, he's not there. I start into the smoke-filled room there. And practically ran him over coming out. And he found somebody. And then, then you realize, like, that turned out to be the right decision. Like, no, I want to run. Like, running is the right decision. No one's gonna criticize you if you run. No one's even going to know if there's anybody, because this whole thing's coming down around us. It's burning around us. It's coming down any second. There's not going to be somebody to live through this to tell the story that you didn't get them. But I said, no, we're going to do this. And there are a handful of doors between where we were standing and the construction entrance, and we went in every one. And when we got to the construction entrance, it collapsed behind us. Like feet behind us. And so that's the hard part of the story. We barely escaped with our lives. The rest of it, yeah, we went through burning hallways and all that stuff, but nothing was collapsing. The threat of death from the impact zone was not just the fire and the smoke, which is what kills most people, but the collapse. And that wasn't the same threat once we got through the construction entrance. And after that, it was just a lot to deal with after that. I had a significant brain injury. I had lost all my hearing on one side. My both eardrums blown out. I wasn't hearing much on my right side either. We were leading a troop that, as we gathered, more people going through the hallway and pulling them out of offices, we had probably 30 or 40 people following us out of this place. I'm not saying we saved all those people. I'm saying at a certain point in time, we would encounter people in the hallway and they would say, well, these guys seem like they know what they're doing. We'll go with them. And we had a crowd coming with us by the time we got out of there. And the Pentagon police were directing everybody to the interior courtyard. By the time we got to a place where we could join folks in the courtyard, I walked up and looked at and it was like 1,000 people, it seemed like, in the courtyard. And I thought, target. And then Joe Baker, who was standing with me, the major, said, that looks like a target. And as the thought was going through my brain, I said, yeah, we're going somewhere else. And we went out another way. And we encountered that 2 or 3 times before we finally came to the metro entrance, and a cop waved us on. He had an automatic rifle with him, and he wasn't pointing it at us, but he was wearing it, which is unusual. And he's saying, keep going, keep going. And I said, no, We have been to 3 exits and we have been turned away. I'm going down here. Sir, you can't do that. I said, well, buddy, you can shoot me if you want, but you'll only be the second guy today who's tried to kill me. So I'm going. And everybody, we all went as a group, and he stood aside, and we got out of the Pentagon that way. And then, again, lots of stuff happened after that. I want to leave that part of it there. The hard part is now you know you're in the country that's at war and you're serving on a military senior staff. What do you do next? And that was just, I had no idea. You know, I had never been a Marine. I never wore the uniform. So I could only speculate about what was going to happen next. But we got a call at home that night, and Cheryl, my wife, was fielding the calls, because at that point my hearing was almost completely gone. I couldn't talk on the phone. And she was have you ever seen the old Saturday Night Live? Garrett Morris, cups his hands and says, "Our top story tonight," for the hearing impaired. It was one of those routines, Phone rings, 11:30. It's the Operations Center, which Marine Corps, all the senior executives and flag officers the Operations Center has to know where you are at all times in case something like this happens. They called. I said, well, what do they want? She talks on the phone. She said, well, Commandant wants to see you tomorrow morning, 7 a.m., 6 a.m. I said, okay, where? She said, talks, gets back and says, Pentagon. I said, the Pentagon is still on fire. And she talked for a second and hung up the phone and turned and looked at me and said, the gunny says, welcome to the Marine Corps. And everything that happened after that came with that level of expectation. All those moments that I had leading up to these moments, which looked for a while like they would be my last, made it clear that I had to find some way to deal with this, that there were a level of expectation that people were counting on me, not to go save the world, but to do my job. And my job in that moment was to help the Marines get ready for war. Nobody's expected me to go win a war, but in these large, complex organizations, especially in the military service, where all kinds of activities have to occur in sync to deliver Marines to a place and a time with equipment that will enable them to win, it's an incredibly involved thing. And I spent the next weeks trying to figure out how to do that, and while I was fighting through a very bad concussion.
Wow. As you talked about in the days and the weeks, and I'll even ask you months after you processed not just the horrific nature of the attack that you were in the middle of at the Pentagon, but also those in New York City and in Pennsylvania, what was that time moving forward as you were still recovering from personal injuries and trying to show great leadership?
In the immediate aftermath, it's hard to separate I almost got killed from what's happening in the rest of the country. I mean, focusing on the duty and what I needed to do in my job to help the Marines was important and helped me kind of move me forward. In those days and weeks that followed, though, I started to understand, not just hear, not just see on TV, but to take on board that this was a bigger tragedy than just what affected me, that the attack really affected all Americans in some way. And I would offer you this analogy. You're a kid who grows up in North Jersey. You see the New York skyline out of your bedroom window. You're like, that's part of your life. New York's there. What is New York to you? It's that city across the river. It's the financial capital of the world. It's the political center of the Northeast, whatever you think of it as. But that becomes a structure in your life. And then one day, bam, this happens and 2 towers go down in a horrific way. And it's fully video televised. That has an impact on that kid and those adults and families, of course, who lost people, even more so, of course. So that's an example of how it wasn't just a piece of news that was alarming, like the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. You saw it in the Washington Post because you were living in Northern Virginia and it didn't really mean anything to you except that you knew it happened. Here you witnessed it and it meant something, and everybody in the country witnessed it in real time. It had a devastating impact, and it helped pull me out of my self-focused, maybe self-pity, this is what happened to me, you know what I mean? And to make me understand that other people were hurt and that we really needed to get it together. And there's another aspect to this, and it's frightening, because it became clear to me that, well, put it to you like this. I heard somebody ask, why did 3,000 people die on September 11th? And the answer is because they couldn't kill 10,000. These people set out to hurt us because we were Americans. For whatever their version of America is or vision of America, I don't know, it's misguided in my view, but never mind. They wanted to kill Americans, and they didn't care who it was. And if they could have killed more, they would have. They tried. Those heroes on that plane that crashed at Shanksville stopped that from happening. That's a hard thing to take on.
One last question I wanted to ask you about this, and appreciate you sharing this incredibly emotional and personal experience with us. I'd like you to just see if you could share with us, because you're in such a unique position to speak to any of our listeners who experience trauma in some form. What do you find most helpful in recovering from what I imagine was the worst day of your life, or one of them, and how did your outlook on the way you saw you change your own life as a result of what you experienced on September 11, 2001?
In the job I'm leaving to retire as an acting assistant secretary for Manpower and Reserve Affairs, I oversee the Office of Force Resiliency, which tracks suicide and sexual assault and essentially the mental health and well-being of Marine sailors and their families and the civilian cohort that serves with them. And I've learned an awful lot in that job. But to compact some of this, and it deserves full treatment on its own, I will say, if you're experiencing something that's causing you to question your will to live, then you should dial 988. And you should seek help. Because, and I don't know who hears this that will hear it in that way. I just want that person to understand, I can't know what your trauma is like. I can't know what your desperation is like. I can relate it to mine, but I can't make it mine. And so you got to find a way through it. And there are people who will help you through that. And I'll tell you something else. There are moments when that call, that pull is stronger. Just like for me, the desire to run was primal. I didn't run. I made conscious choices that made the difference in some people's lives. Luckily. So I would say to that person who's experiencing that level of desperation and loneliness, you are not alone. Do not let this moment and the feeling and emotion that you have in the moment cause you to do something that will hurt many people around you. And you can probably name them right off the top of your head. Instead, go to those people. Instead of them receiving that phone call that says he or she did this, go to them and say, I don't want you to get that phone call, but I can use your help.
You've shared so many experiences with us, from the time that you grew up to your time at Ireton, and all these incredible life experiences and this incredibly painful experience that you just described for us. And as we come to the end of the podcast, I'd love to just hear some of your thoughts on this school. And when you think about your life and all you've been through, and you think about Bishop Ireton, what do you think about the most? And what are you excited about the most as you look forward? I know your class in particular in the fall of 2027 is going to celebrate 50 years. And just tell us, when you think about the Cardinals, what comes to your heart?
I wish it was easy to say there's a single thought. There is a rush of thoughts. But for me, this experience came to me at the right time. And because of the people, because of the oblates and the lay staff, the other students, my friends, our sister school, St. Mary's, all of that was very positive for me, and in many ways not just shaped me but saved me. I'm not sure I can explain why. If you didn't hear the part about the family had collapsed, when my father left, we forced him out. Like I said, I have 3 brothers, and 3 of us were home one night and made him leave. So imagine that for a second. And the family collapsed, and not a lot of good things happen to kids who experience that. And it's easy because you're put on the path. There's just a train wreck at the end of it if you just stay on the path. You have to find a way to get off that path. I found a way, and people here helped me. And so, in a very real sense, Bishop Ireton saved me.
That's Bobby Hogue, BI class of 1977, a terrific example of what it means to be a Bishop Ireton Cardinal. I'm Ryan Fannin, and you've been listening to Bishop Ireton's Real World Wednesdays.